Hello everybody, this is Sean Anderson. I'm with Amazon Web Services. I'd like to thank everybody for joining today. I also have joining us today, you're going to hear from CloudPassage. We have Ram Krishnan, he's the Chief Product Officer, and one of our joint customers, Xero, Aaron McEwen. He's the Lead Security Architect. You'll hear from him in a little bit as well. I'd like to just reiterate what Jerry had mentioned with the Q&A. Please post your questions and we'll take as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And then for those of you that have questions that may have not gotten answered during this webinar, we'll make sure that we get those back and get those posted shortly after. Part of the reason that we do this is securing your data on AWS is a critical piece, and to understand that we have a partner ecosystem is critical for our customers. You have valuable IP. Everyone has heard that there's this thing called the cloud, and we have the infrastructure now that is sitting in the cloud. And what does that mean to us as customers? It means that you don't have to worry about the servers and the racks and the AC and HVAC and all that. And what we're trying to do now is to reiterate to our customers that you still need to be aware that your data protection is still on you as the customer, and we have partners that we work with that will help with that. We all know that the statistics are pretty obvious. They're gross. Black Hat was a couple weeks ago, RSA earlier in the year, and it keeps getting worse with malware. People that are not out of compliance. The increase in theft and hard intellectual property is at 56%. 70% of our consumers have indicated that they avoid business following a security breach, and it takes a long time to build back that credibility. So you want to avoid that in the first place. AWS can be more secure than your existing environment, and I came as a former CISO working with on-prem. The questions asked are, if you've heard of the SANS Security Top 20, can you give me a list of hardware and software? A lot of companies will tell you, give us a couple of weeks to get that for you. The beauty of the cloud is it gives you the ability to have automated logging and monitoring, simplifying your resource access, making it easy to encrypt properly. So if I go and ask, I go out to the console and say, how many servers do we have? It's right there in front of me. I don't have to guess. I don't have to go and find 27 data centers and find out what's actually in there, and then the moment I leave, they replace a rack because it went bad. And then we can enforce strong authentication as well, because we have physical access controls and we have logical access controls. The shared security model is a critical piece here over at AWS and the way we look at our environment. We've taken the infrastructure piece out of it for you so that we've secured that. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides. But on the upper side with your data, we want to make sure you understand you're still responsible for patching, you're still responsible for identity and access control, inventorying and configuration of your operating systems and in what you have set up, and then of course of your data encryption. When you are looking at us, we have numerous services and features, and we're introducing new ones every week, it seems. We're currently over 75 services, and we have over 1,000 features on our platform alone. And we have an ecosystem of partners that's in the thousands. And the shared security model is what we built our whole infrastructure and our whole system on, so that you understand we do have partners that will help you build out your environment. It's constantly monitored. It's protected by an extensive network and security monitoring. We have a full team that are constantly looking at the latest trends, the malware, monitoring the environments. Network access is monitored by our security managers daily. We encourage all of our customers to use CloudTrail and be able to set up those monitors and view those API calls and review those records and see what's going on in your environment. And then we have Amazon Inspector, which is automatically assessing your applications. This was a capability that was released last year in the late fall at reInvent. We have a lot of customers that are looking at that now as how are my applications being accessed and used. And we encourage our partners and our customers to use those along with the services that our customers, along with what our partners have as well. Talked about high availability. A lot of customers are asking, well, if I go with your partners, where are they available? Our partner ecosystem, in order for us to have partnerships, we make sure that these companies are vetted to work across multiple availability zones and multiple regions so that they're scalable. We encourage companies that are starting out to make sure they clearly articulate that of where they're available. We also want you to make sure you can retain control of where your data resides. If you're in the U.S. or you're located overseas in another country, you want to say, hey, I want this in the region in Germany, or I want this to stay in the U.S. proper. You make that decision when you set up your environment, and you say, I want it in regions 1 or 2, and I want it in these availability zones. This also allows you to mitigate the risk of a DDoS attack. We have auto-scaling. We also have Route 53, our own DNS capability, to help you be able to identify and track where your information is going and where it sits. And it allows you to do backup and auto recovery too, in the event of a disaster. So if you have an on-prem environment today, it allows you to. We believe in a hybrid model. One of the reasons we do these webinars with our partners is a lot of them have been successful in helping customers slowly move to the cloud versus a full jump. And it enables you to improve your security, so you integrate with your existing Active Directory, you have on-prem, you can also do cloud, you have dedicated connections that are secure, and then it allows you to manage your encryption. And you can choose to have that done in the AWS environment, or you can choose to manage those keys as well on your own. The choice is yours. Compliance being the issue, we get asked all the time, well, how is your infrastructure secured? How do you do this? How do you do that? One of the things that I want to reiterate is that you, through NDA, can have access to any of our audits that come from the Cloud Security Alliance, the U.S. government, ISO standards, international, SOC 1 and 2. If you're interested in that and you want to research that further, please contact us and we'll get that in place. Now I'd like to hand it off to our customer and our partners, and I'd like Ram to take it with CloudPassage and give you a little bit of an understanding of what they're doing working with us as a partner.
Great. Thank you, Sean. So Sean said, my name is Ram Krishnan, and I'm with CloudPassage. I lead the product organization here. And what I plan to do today is provide you a brief perspective on how we see organizations provide security at the workload layer in the modern data center and cloud environments, in conjunction with our infrastructure partners like AWS. So let's start by, first of all, pointing out that we're dealing with two very significant kinds of massive IT transformations. First of all, there's a transformation underway in how large enterprises deliver IT to their business. In the traditional IT delivery model on the left, everything was built around a data center or co-location facility with well-defined perimeters protected by firewalls and other security appliances. In this data center, you had islands of virtualization where each business application typically was segmented off on its own subnet with a virtualized rack of servers, let's say, per application. But as shown on the right, today the picture is getting a lot more complex. Inside this data center, in addition to the traditional virtualization, you most likely have efforts underway moving towards software-defined data center and private cloud frameworks like OpenStack with flat networks of on-demand compute resources. You also have development and operations teams who are developing with and deploying containers in addition to VMs, adopting new DevOps methodology and tooling like Chef or Puppet or Jenkins for orchestration and continuous delivery. And then, of course, you have the adoption of public cloud infrastructure as a service led by Amazon EC2 and others, and that's accelerating rapidly. Now, the result of this, if you think about this transformation, is that it's causing a lot of strain on existing security processes and tools. This is what we find from the organizations that we work with. In Agile IT delivery, as we call this sort of new age way of doing things, the perimeter has become increasingly porous and less defined. Systems are no longer strictly centrally controlled. Applications are no longer on their own islands of virtualization, quote unquote, but they're defined more as workloads that deploy on flat shared networks of compute capacity. The workloads themselves may be deployed in a greater variety of environments than ever before, from bare metal to private or public or hybrid cloud environments. And then perhaps most significantly, the rate of change in these environments is dramatically higher than before due to elasticity, due to auto-scaling, cloud bursting, etc. So that's the first key sort of transformation we're seeing that impacts how people may secure their infrastructure and their workloads, excuse me. The second key transformation is in how the applications themselves are developed and delivered. And this is likely to be very well known to all of you listening out there. Organizations are evolving from this traditional waterfall method that existed all these years of creating applications where there were very well-defined phases of, design and development, testing and release, etc., and, a cycle that lasted 9 to 12 months. Now, as shown here, that's evolved and compressed, if you will. The picture, which this new sort of agile development approach, is a lot more complicated. Now software release cycles are compressed into a month or two or less. They often consist of sprints that are 1 or 2 weeks. And there are multiple parallel streams of code development. Now this model completely breaks the traditional approach to security as a runtime construct, where historically security tools and processes were implemented in the production environment. Now with such short iterations, the organization cannot wait on every cycle for security to be added into the production environment. So what's happening, we're finding with our customers, is increasingly in this type of agile development ecosystem, security is increasingly being viewed as a blocker to agile software development and to the sort of DevOps deployment. In fact, this is borne out by a very interesting survey that was recently done of the entire information security community that's on LinkedIn. And I think for the large number of respondents that replied to this survey, nearly 60%, or 3 out of 5, said that traditional security tools just don't work as well as they need to secure their applications and workloads in cloud environments. In fact, the actual answer, the percentage was greater. If you look at this chart carefully, it shows that about 27% of the people kind of abstained from taking a position. So it's more like 80% of those that had an opinion said that existing tools simply don't work for them in this new transformed kind of environment. So, the bottom line conclusion out of that we posit is that this new, what we think of as agile IT delivery, fundamentally requires a new way of delivering security. We need a similar agile security approach to match the dramatically increased speed and agility and so forth of the new sort of digital economy. So when we say that, what do we mean exactly by agile security? We define agile security as an approach that has similar characteristics to the agile and DevOps transformation in IT delivery and development. First of all, it is on demand. It is centered around the workload rather than the network. It is highly policy-driven and dynamic. It is highly automated, and it fits into the existing orchestration and DevOps tool chains. It has an emphasis on reducing the attack surface by proactively locking down, or securing the environment. It's very, very portable, and it works anywhere. Yet, you have the awareness of the underlying context upon which it's being run. And very significantly, it acts as a full workload level type of security platform in that it's highly extensible and designed to integrate seamlessly into your existing infrastructure and environment via very rich APIs. So that's what we're seeing in terms of the ecosystem. So I wanted to pose a question at this point around where do you think, those of you in the audience, your greatest security risk may lie? This is actually a chart that shows you who's responsible for security in the different layers of the IT stack. And you may be familiar with this. It's called the shared responsibility model, and our partner, Amazon, talks about this quite a bit. And when you run your own data center, essentially, you are responsible for securing everything from that bottom layer of the physical environment all the way up to user administration. When you're in a colo kind of facility, they are responsible for the physical security. But when you're running in an infrastructure as a service environment, the cloud security provider, in this case AWS, is responsible for the lower layers of the stack. And you, as the practitioner or their customer, are responsible for the upper layers. This is the shared responsibility model for security. And Gartner surveyed, as I said, a number of practitioners to determine where they thought their greatest security risk lay across these layers. And what do you think the answer was? Well, I'll tell you. As it turns out, it was in the top half of this picture. Now, this should not be surprising at all, because in an IaaS type environment, public cloud providers like Amazon and others are doing a great job of securing the lower layers, and you heard about this from Sean here right before me. And if you analyze all the breaches from the last 5 years, what you're able to see, and this is what Gartner did, that most of the threats are targeting the guest operating system and the application framework right there in the midst of that picture. Now, it turns out that we at CloudPassage have focused our attention exactly on those two layers. This is where we believe the risk is greatest. Not only is this the case that these layers represent the highest risk, But you should also note that if so happens, you can control these layers of the stack in a consistent manner across all of your servers and workloads, from the ones that might be in your traditional data center to the ones in a public cloud environment like AWS and everything in between. And this is what we've done at CloudPassage. We've built a security system that is focused on the workload, and it provides a broad range of security controls and is built for speed, automation, etc. So let's take a look at this environment. Our platform is called CloudPassage Halo, and what's really interesting about this is really how we're delivering these security controls. At the heart of this picture is the CloudPassage Halo security orchestration engine there on the bottom left. And Halo operates as a service, so getting started, obviously, we find for our customers is relatively fast and easy. What they do is practitioners set up security policies for logical server groups on the Halo portal via an easy-to-use UI. Now, modern servers, AMI instances, containers, etc., mostly get created through very automated tool chains. And Halo is purpose-built for this kind of approach. So while servers are created, as they're created through scripts or through orchestration tools like a Jenkins or a Chef, a Puppet, a Salt, Ansible, etc., the Halo micro agent is automatically included in the build. Each Halo agent securely contacts the security orchestration engine every 60 seconds or so to pick up the latest command and control instructions, and then returns telemetry back to the engine for analytics processing and alerting. Now, the protected servers or workloads in this environment, it's important to understand, can be literally anywhere. They can be in a traditional data center on bare metal. They can be virtualized. They can be in a private cloud stack. And of course, they could be in Amazon AWS EC2 or any other public infrastructure as a service cloud environment. Now, what Halo does here effectively is provide one platform to orchestrate security and compliance across all of these environments for your organization. Now, the Halo micro agent is ultra lightweight, as little as 3 megabytes. And the reason for this, I want to explain, is because Halo turns the the traditional security processing model on its head. It kind of makes it upside down, in that 95% or more of the processing and analytics are done by us in the cloud, right? Essentially almost completely eliminating any impact on the performance of the actual protected workloads themselves. And then lastly, and certainly not least, as you can see in this picture on the bottom right, what we try to do with Halo is provide a very powerful REST API interface for rich integration to the existing SOC or SIEM or identity and access management or GRC types of tools that you already have in your environment, in addition to those orchestration tools, so that you can leverage your existing investments in software infrastructure. Okay, so we've taken a look at a very high level of how the Halo product is architected. I want to briefly speak here at the very end on how it's used. So what we've listed here are the top challenges or business problems that we're helping our enterprise customers address. I'll just kind of run through these, I guess left to right from the top. So first of all is the ability to protect workloads. And this is, if you will, kind of the core use case that we've been talking about. This is where, server instance compromise is the leading cause for breaches in an IaaS environment, as I was saying earlier. And you can reduce the software attack surface of your cloud workloads by automating vulnerability management, configuration security, server account management, privilege management, etc., regardless of what hosting environment, OS, or stack your workloads are deployed on. That's the first business problem we find a lot of our customers are using this for. The next one has to do with the concept of microsegmentation. As I was saying earlier, the new data center is built around these large pools of compute with networks that are flatter with an increasing amount of east-west traffic. The challenge is that advanced threats can bypass traditional firewalls in this context, in these kind of shared environments. And as new workloads are added and retired dynamically, you can essentially reduce the network attack surface by automating what we think of as policy-based microsegmentation through traffic discovery and orchestrating your host firewalls. Another business problem you can address is essentially compromise detection. That's, as the name implies, allowing you to detect compromise in these elastic cloud workloads you have in a way where traditional network-based IDS tools can't go there, And in an environment where that would typically break a traditional standard file integrity monitoring tool in this sort of elastic, widely dispersed, disparate environment. You're able to use Halo in this environment to seamlessly integrate into your orchestration workflows as they exist across your build and production environments and detect compromise. Another very significant problem that our customers use us for, again, similar to what Sean talked about in the AWS case, is for compliance automation. Essentially for, it's giving you the ability to be able to manage, being able to watch for an accurate inventory of systems and their security posture. This is a huge challenge for organizations across these environments. And Halo enables you to be able to automate that even for systems that are spun up in an elastic environment on demand. And you're able to show compliance with external regulations or internal security policy. The fifth point here, I think, in the bottom center there is a really important one. We find a lot of our customer organizations are using our solution for delivering essentially security into the DevOps environment. This is a major challenge, and I talked about this earlier when I discussed the notion of traditional to sort of new Agile development. In the Agile software development and DevOps methods, they've brought a lot of speed and quality benefits, but they frankly put a very significant strain on security organizations because they've broken the existing model of security being a production construct. Halo allows organizations to bake policy-based security right into the development process, seamlessly integrating with orchestration tools like Chef and Puppet and Ansible. And so security can now be an integral part of the DevOps cycle from development all the way through production. And then last and certainly not least, as listed over here, we partner with folks like AWS, building off that shared responsibility model where Amazon provides the security of the cloud up to the hypervisor or the stack underneath and requires our users to provide the security in the cloud from the AMI instance up. And with Halo, we can achieve exactly this by providing this cloud workload protection in a way that works seamlessly with elasticity and auto-scaling. So that's sort of the very quick overview I wanted to provide you of the business problems we're seeing and how we're addressing them. So at this stage, I'd like to hand off to our featured speaker today, Aaron McKeown, the lead security architect for Xero, to talk about how they are implementing cloud security. Aaron?
Thanks, Ram. There we go. So, yep, my name's Aaron McKeown. I'm the lead security architect at Xero. And today I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Xero because I'm sure not many people know who Xero are. I'm going to talk about our migration to the AWS public cloud. Then I'm just going to talk about some of our security services models for AWS and then some of the key principles and learnings that we've had through this move to an Agile security services model in the cloud. So firstly, Xero. So Xero is what we describe as a beautiful cloud accounting software. So we talk about connecting the right people anywhere, anytime, and on any device to the numbers that make their business grow. So as you can see there, that's our interface. But that's not really how I like to describe Xero. How I really like to describe Xero is by these numbers because these numbers tell a much better story of what Xero is all about. And to me, there's two numbers on that page that I like to think about. The first one is the 1,450 staff that we have across the globe. So we have offices in the US, the UK, Australia, I think South Africa now, Singapore, and here in New Zealand where I'm based, if anyone couldn't tell by my accent, even though I'm Australian. But when I look at those 1,450 people, I think about how are those staff, primarily developers and engineers, going to access our AWS public cloud environment, and that's been a massive challenge for us and one that I'll talk about later. But then secondly, I talk about the $1 trillion worth of incoming and outgoing transactions that were processed through our platform. And to me, that $1 trillion is a massive amount of money, but it also makes me think about how we secure and how we build an agile, elastic infrastructure that can support that amount of traffic. But then I think about this 700,000 subscribers. So to us, that's 700,000 small businesses that are able to operate on the Xero platform on a daily basis. And when you look at that growth curve, you can see that it's been quite exponential. It's been fast. It's been putting challenges on our engineering teams. But then when we look at our 5th generation platform, which is the one we're operating on right now, I think about that 5th generation platform and I think about the monumental change in how that platform operates. we've gone from an on-premise data center infrastructure to a fully elastic cloud-based infrastructure, and that's just been a complete paradigm shift. So in terms of our public cloud migration, we really started that public cloud migration 2 years ago. I joined Xero about 2 years ago to work on that public cloud migration, and it's really at a culmination point right now. And we had 5 key goals for that public cloud migration. The first key goal was about supporting the next wave of growth. It was about being able to scale up and scale down depending on when the market demands it. It was about being able to cut our infrastructure build times from the weeks to the days to the hours to even the minutes that we need. So previously, we were in that traditional type architecture where we had to wait weeks for infrastructure to be purchased, procured, deployed, delivered, etc. But now with Amazon, we're able to actually deploy that infrastructure in potentially minutes. We also wanted to reduce our per customer cost, lower our overall spend and make our cost to serve much lower. But we also wanted to do 2 things, which was eliminate scheduled downtime and improve our data protection. And we've been able to do that through building more advanced architecture using some of the services that we talked about earlier in this presentation. But for me, the most important one of these actual goals was that idea of maintaining but also improving our security posture. And that really drills down to 2 things in terms of our architecture. The first one is we had a goal of no breaches or accidental information disclosures. And secondly, this is my personal sort of goal, we wanted to build a fully automated and agile infrastructure stack, but one that extended over to the security components. So an agile and automated security component stack, but most importantly, a security component stack that could be delivered and managed by the actual developers and engineers themselves. And that's pretty important because that is going to make my job easier and make my team's job easier. And that's going to share the responsibility out to other parts of our business, which is really, really important. But we faced a number of key challenges as well. So, you know, I just wanted to quickly touch on some of them because they're pretty important and they're probably the same challenges other organizations have faced as well. The first one is skills are very, very scarce. When we first started this process 2 years ago, we found we had to spend a massive amount of money on training and investment in our current and new team members. So that was about bringing people up to speed with the public cloud. But now what we're finding is that, in particular in my team, we're finding that when we're trying to find new resources or new staff members, we can either find security skills or AWS skills, but not both. So it's really, really important to try and develop your own teams and develop your own skill sets, but build that both security skills and AWS skills. It's really important, but also that importance needs to share over to the actual partners and the vendors themselves. So we talk about this idea of a shared journey with AWS and a shared journey with our partners such as CloudPassage, but those skills need to be shared as well. And secondly, one of our other challenges, and this one I faced myself, was the idea of regional representation and recommendations. When I first started this project, I went to AWS for recommendations about which security vendors should I work with, who are their recommendations for firewalls or other security products. And the thing is, you know, back then, the companies that they were recommending weren't the companies that I was personally used to dealing with. Some enterprise vendors were slow to catch up. So that really spun things on its head for me. So I had to think quite differently in regards to who I worked with. And then secondly, for me being based down here in New Zealand, regional representation was and continues to be an issue. Some organizations are quite adept at dealing with regional sort of representation issues, but others, you know, their R&D teams are based in the US or Israel or any of these sort of places. So that's also become an issue for us. But it's changing, which is fantastic. But speaking of changing, we quickly realized our entire application architecture had to change. We had quite a monolithic application architecture, and we're using this as a massive opportunity to look at not just lifting and shifting into AWS, but also to look at the way our application is connected, look at the way that things are being done, and look at the wide array of services that AWS and their partners can provide. You know, and you know, as Sean sort of said, there's a massive amount of products and features being released by AWS all the time, and we're quick to take advantage of those, and that's super important to maintain our own internal agility. But to maintain that agility, we had to automate. You know, automation in this type of environment is key. It's absolutely key because things need to be repeatable, you know, and automation takes time and takes investment, but we spent that time and we spent that investment, and now those dividends are now starting to pay back. But visibility, again, was a challenge for us because, you know, we started with one AWS account. We ended up quickly with 10, 20, 30, and I think a number of AWS accounts we have at the moment is over 50. There's probably another one being created while I'm on this webinar right now. So that means that not only do we need to take, you know, a single sort of view of what's happening in each individual AWS account, but having that sort of visibility across our entire infrastructure stack in the public cloud is super, super important, because as Ram was saying, you know, the borders and the boundaries have changed, and we need to have a massive amount of visibility. And finally, this one, you know, is the thing that sort of protracted things out the most, and that's the third-party commercial models, because we found that AWS has consumption-based pricing, which is fantastic, and, you know, it's really great for us to be able to scale up and scale down and meet all of our key goals and all that sort of stuff, which is excellent. So, but we found that when I started to engage with more traditional enterprise security vendors, we had struggles, because, you know, those vendors still had models where you could, you know, procure infrastructure as if it was tin, and those models just needed to change. And I'm happily able to report that those models have changed, and they are changing, and, you know, we're making massive progress, and that's really been fantastic and a big victory for us. But what we did was we started our entire journey, and I sat down and I really just thought about 3 key principles for cloud security. So we've got this concept of a cloud security team at Xero, and I sat down and I thought about 3 key principles, and they're those 3 key principles there. And I want to go through those because I think they're important, and I think they're principles that any organization can use, and they're ones that I talk about all the time, and my team gets sick of me talking about them, frankly. But the first one is the idea of having repeatable and automated build and management of security systems. And what does that mean? I guess it means 2 things for me. It means no console access. So the goal is not to use the console. The goal is to use the API for absolutely everything. And in terms of security, that really threw some people sort of on their heads, you know, not being able to go into the console to make firewall rule changes, for example. That's we talk about a paradigm shift, and it is. But the second thing that means is, it means that everything must be done using CI/CD tools, which is super, super important. It means you can track and monitor and understand exactly what's being done inside your infrastructure, and it just helps you immensely. So it means no console access and do everything through CI/CD. But then the second principle is talking about this concept of accelerated pace of security innovation. So, you know, Sean talked about the features that Amazon released, but at Xero we released over 800 new features into our platform last year alone. So that's 800 individual new features. So we're quite an agile, fast-paced organization. Our developers move very, very quickly, which is fantastic for our market agility and all that sort of stuff. But security isn't traditionally seen as something that is quite agile and accelerated. But we had to move quickly and keep pace with both Amazon, our own organization, and some of our partners. And that's been a struggle, but that's been about building up a cloud security team that can work in an agile way, that has an agile mindset, and that moves very, very quickly. And that's about also bringing vendors and partners, mind you, like CloudPassage and others, along that agile accelerated journey as well. And thirdly, it's about on-demand security infrastructure. So I talked about the idea of having, you know, sort of on-demand infrastructure earlier, but this is all about on-demand security infrastructure. So this is about the other teams outside cloud security consuming our security infrastructure, but only paying for what they need and not paying for peak usage. It's about being able to scale up and scale down our security infrastructure when we need it. And to do that, we needed two things. We needed the automation and the systems, but we also needed the commercial models to be able to support that sort of infrastructure. And our ultimate goal of this principle is to be able to allow the rest of our development teams to be able to actually scale up and be on demand when they need it themselves. So what we did was we built a security as a service environment in which we operate. Because essentially the way that Xero operates is we have product-based teams. Those product-based teams are responsible for the products that they build. So Xero isn't just one product, it's multiple products. They get to choose the technology, the tools, the practices, the processes that they want to use to build and deploy their own infrastructure and systems, and they get to operate that infrastructure themselves. That means that we are faced as a security team with a variety of platforms in which we have to support. So what that means is that our goal is really to help those product teams improve their security posture, but also help them deliver faster and reduce costs. I like to use this idea of our role is to keep these other teams on the road rather than sort of having gates through which they have to pass for security. And that's super, super important. But what we actually do is we provide a security framework and patterns for those other product teams to ingest. And I'll use an example. Some of our teams now are starting to use things like AWS Lambda or the container service or some of these newly released features. So what we need to do as a cloud security team is we need to be ahead of them in terms of when these features are released, and we need to start thinking about how to actually secure these systems as quickly as possible. So when these teams come to me or people in my team and say, okay, we're building the solution based on AWS Lambda, I can then say, okay, well, here's the checklist. You need to just have a look at these things. Think about these aspects of your implementation. Think about how you can follow AWS and our best practice in order to correctly implement the AWS technology in question. We really ultimately want to make sure that our teams are not only fast, but also secure. We used to think about the idea of being fast or secure, but now we say fast and secure. So that's really important. So what I wanted to do is talk about a couple of aspects of that security as a service and 3 areas of technology that I'm particularly interested in and I think people can take information away. The first one is the idea of multi-factor authentication. And this is something that I like to talk about all the time. And it's about the idea of further securing AWS. So we like to further secure AWS by using multi-factor authentication. And that's about using a password and MFA or an access key and MFA for either the console access or API and CLI access. And that's really, really important. That's something that should be done on day one when starting to work inside AWS. But secondly, I like the idea of just securing all systems with MFA. If you've got access to MFA in a system, you should put it on. You should also use advanced MFA features. So when those MFA solutions are implemented, you should definitely think about how do you do geolocation, how do you do client checking, these sorts of things. And those tools and features are super important when you actually start to think about a public cloud environment and allowing your developers and engineers access into the public cloud environment. And finally, what we also like to do is we like to actually use multiple MFA features. So what that really means is we have MFA on our edge access environment, but then also when we actually get down to the EC2 instances that we need access to, we add further MFA checks. You can't have too much security, right? So the second thing is this whole concept of visibility and the elastic nature of the AWS public cloud environment. And that makes me think about the word configuration drift. And configuration drift wasn't really something I was too familiar with before starting this journey myself. It was quite a foreign concept because I was used to static environments, static enterprise type security environments. But in an environment like the public cloud where our developers are free to choose and do whatever they like, configuration drift is really, really something you've got to keep a handle on. And how do you do that? You use tools like AWS CloudTrail, AWS Config. You use the console. They give you a massive amount of great information. But sometimes it's very, very difficult to find that proverbial needle in the haystack because there's just so much information there. So what we did, we enhanced those tools by using products like Netflix Security Monkey, which is a great open source solution, and that provides us a single pane of glass across our entire AWS environment. So that has enhanced and enabled, it's enhanced the environment and enabled my team as well as other business units to be able to see what's happening. They can see what the state of the AWS configuration environment is now, and they can see what it used to be, which is really important. But then to the topic at hand, host security automation. You know, it's really important to look after your hosts, because the hosts in your environment are the things that change the most. You know, we recycle our hosts on a daily basis. That means we tear down hundreds and hundreds of AWS hosts on a daily basis. So those EC2 instances can be here one day and then in 24 hours they're not. So it's really important to have a host-based security system and a host security automation system that's really, it's ingrained in the deployment culture of the organization. You know, and Ram talked about this. For us, it was about spending a massive amount of time actually educating and documenting the value and importance of host security automation, not only to my team, engineers, but also the developers, so they know that CloudPassage for us is baked or deployed into every EC2 instance that's stood up inside our environment. And that's really important. We have that culture now, so that CloudPassage is baked into every environment, or it's deployed into every environment. But that took time. That took education, it took documentation, and took time to build implementation strategies for those products. But it's also important to make sure that environment is very, very elastic. And so with our CloudPassage environment, it is elastic. It means that when those systems are torn down on a daily basis, we don't end up with thousands and thousands of orphaned agents. There's a cleanup process. Everything is neat and tidy. We're working on integration and visibility. So we talk about integration and visibility. We're working on integration of the CloudPassage solution to our wider security toolset, because we're quite focused on the idea of ensuring that we only deploy tools that are well connected and able to communicate with each other and are able to actually provide value as a whole, not just as an individual component. It's really important. So I can't stress enough that detecting and defending at the host level is probably the most important piece of the entire puzzle when it comes to the public cloud. And that leads me on to this idea, and I'm stealing a bit of information here from AWS themselves, and they like to talk about shared responsibility, but I like to think about the new paradigm of shared responsibility. We talk about security of the cloud, which is AWS, of course, as per this diagram, but I like to talk about security on the cloud being not only Xero, but the partner ecosystem. And it's really a sharing now of that responsibility between us, which is Xero, and I'm talking about everyone at Xero, not just the security team, but it's us, the partner, and AWS, because really these three organizations have to work together and in lockstep to be able to actually deliver an effective security outcome. Things are changing too quickly and things are too elastic and dynamic to not work together in order to get that security outcome. It's something that we're quite big on. It's something that means that when we did start this process, we were quite particular in regards to the process we went through to select the partners that we ended up working with throughout our entire cloud migration project. And that's really, really important, the new paradigm of our shared responsibility. But we learned quite a lot on the way through. You know, when I wrote, sort of four things about what we've learned, and it's been a good opportunity for me to sit back and think about what we've learned. And the first one was the whole idea of security by design, and that's quite, fantastic. The idea you do a security design and all that sort of stuff, and infrastructure as code and all that sort of thing. But what it means to me in particular after the last 2 years is you've got to get the entire organization, in particular the developers, thinking about security as part of their design. It's most important. They've got to be thinking about security from day one. It means about getting the product teams on board with security, getting the product owners, getting the product managers and other members of the product teams thinking about security. So it's not an add-on, or it's not something they think about at the end. It's something they think about from day one. And the way you do that is through effective communication. I talk about the idea of who are your spokespeople, and everyone in the team is the spokesperson. It means that everyone in my team is, the evangelist. They communicate their success, they communicate our failure, they do a lot of demonstrations, and they wrote a massive amount of documentation. We've got wiki pages and all that sort of stuff, but the important thing is here we have well communicated definitions of what our security services model is supposed to deliver. So it's very, very clear to everyone where our goals are, what our milestones look like, what our roadmap looks like. We operate security as a service as if it was a product itself, and that is really, really important, because those two things, the communication, makes designing our solution in a secure manner much more effective. But then the third key thing we like to think about in terms of learning, or I personally, was the idea of measuring and testing and monitoring everything. Because AWS was so new to me and it's new to everyone, we like to think about the idea of, if you don't have a metric on it, how do you know what it is? And with AWS, it's really, really important and easy to put metrics on things. It's as simple as going into an API call, or even in the console, which I just said we shouldn't do. But it's the idea of putting metrics on everything, even to start with, so you can understand what a baseline is all about. And that's really important. So we're putting a massive amount of effort into the idea of visibility and metrics. And that's something that we learned quite quickly, that if you don't start that process early, it'll quickly become out of control. But lastly, and this is sort of my own sort of take on my own personal journey, is the idea of, where's my span port? Because, I sat down 2 years ago, and I sat down with one of the AWS security SEs for this region, and I sort of said to him, all right, I've got to write a security architecture design. How do I get a span port? Because immediately I thought straight away, I need a span port, and I'm going to do all this fancy sort of stuff because I came from an enterprise background. And he sat there and he said to me, whoa, there's no span port. That's not how things work. And I, not having worked at AWS before, I thought the sky was going to fall in, and I thought the entire architecture was just going to fall apart. But what that illustrates to me now, when I think back on that conversation, is that I had to take a change, and I had to go along a journey and essentially walk the walk now. And I've done that, and I've now changed my way of thinking to a cloud native way of thinking about security. And that's a journey that everyone needs to go on, because, like for us, we're a cloud native organization. We're not running in a hybrid infrastructure. My team is the cloud security team, so I had to go along that journey and walk that walk, which means basically I needed to think differently from day one and think about new and innovative ways of dealing with these new and innovative challenges. But that was also something we needed to do with our partners. We engaged a range of partners through this entire process, and some of them, and I think all of them in some respects, needed to go along that journey. And the report is that those partners have all come along that journey, and there's been some fantastic successes, and I've seen massive amounts of innovation coming out of those partners. Like you take CloudPassage, we work quite closely with that organization on things like shared roadmap and some innovative ideas about how to tackle the host security and automation challenges. And that's been a fantastic, exciting journey to go along, and I'm excited about the next phase of that journey as well. So those are the 4 key things that I've learned through this entire journey, and I think those things are things that people who are listening can take along with them as well. But I guess the final thing I like to always finish with, and I'll just keep talking about these things all the time, is the 3 most important things you could take away from anything I've said is your environment needs to be repeatable and automated. It's very, very important. You need to operate at accelerated pace. There's no more taking days or weeks to decide things. You've literally got minutes to make your decisions and to come up with robust and elastic security architectures. And then lastly, your security infrastructure needs to be on demand. You've got to have infrastructure that can be stood up or torn down within minutes or hours rather than days, weeks or months. It's very, very important. But it's also very important to remember and think about the idea of there is no more fast or secure, it's fast and secure.
Thank you, Aaron. We have a couple of questions. We have about 10 minutes, so if we see if we can get to a couple of these. I'm going to wake Ram back up and bring him up for a question here. The question came up, what do you mean exactly when you say reduce the attack surface? How does that work? And can you go into a little bit of detail on that?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. So I did use that phrase a couple of times. What I mean by that really is, if you think about the environment, the key here is you want to narrow the vectors through which you can be attacked, as the phrase implies. But specifically what we mean by this is being able to, first of all, protect the workload and in the traditional ways, which is monitor for configuration and ensure that the configuration you have is what you would expect or is a desired state. Ensure that you're tracking vulnerabilities and ensuring that you're quickly detecting if there are any vulnerabilities in the environment. Looking for sort of access capabilities to the servers, the workloads, in terms of things like who has privileges, what kind of folks have privileged access and how that's being monitored and logged and tracked. Watching for compromise detection, whether it's looking at the actual specific binaries or executables and looking to see if they've been compromised in some way, or looking at logs and tracking for signs of intrusion. And then it's reducing the network attack surface. I talked about sort of reducing the attack surface in the software side. Then from the network side, it's things like being able to do what I referred to earlier as micro-segmentation. So actually ensuring that the individual workloads are clearly shielded, if you will, from each other, or just being able to orchestrate firewall roles according to what sorts of traffic is and is not allowed. And actually, in the first place, having visibility into traffic and ensuring that you're able to actually monitor what traffic is flowing from across the different workloads, or, if you will, ports, etc., and then use that to easily decide and configure and alter your configuration in order to reduce and narrow the scope of network attack surface, if you will. So those are the kinds of things I'm referring to when I said reduce the attack surface. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Question came up with regard to DevOps, and I'll ask Aaron to tackle this one first. But how do you work with DevOps within your company? DevOps normally wants to own the environment. So how have you worked that in your own experience? And then we'll hand it off over to Ram if he has anything to add.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Actually, it's been something that's been quite difficult and challenging, and it's taken an entire sort of shift in terms of how this organization operates. I guess from my perspective is we had a pretty traditional sort of support organization, development services for infrastructure production support, development support, and devs, right? So what we've moved to, and I don't know whether this answers your question, is we moved to embedded DevOps. So basically what we did was we split the pretty much the infrastructure support team into what we call platform as a service teams and embedded DevOps. So for example, we have our product-based teams, which I talked about, like banking, payroll, practice, etc., and core. Now they've got embedded DevOps in those environments, which means that they, as the DevOps representatives, are sharing that knowledge of infrastructure and DevOps capabilities out to the different development teams that they're embedded in, and those teams are responsible. But that means that those teams do the security work themselves to a point. And what I can use an example of, basically things like the deployment of CloudPassage agents, the deployment of firewall infrastructure, all those security components that live inside their own infrastructures are deployed by the embedded DevOps teams themselves. So again, it's about the idea of us sharing out some of that responsibility. So, I've worked in organizations where it was unheard of that, an engineer outside of security would deploy and configure the firewall infrastructure or the host-based security, but we've shared out, and we're further sharing out that capability and that access to those embedded DevOps teams. And we also started this idea of site reliability as well. So the idea of the site reliability team is almost like a third line sort of proactive sort of support team, and that site reliability team is almost like a conduit between the embedded DevOps teams and us. So what we're trying to do is share out the responsibility, and the way I see it is sometime very, very soon that share out will be completed to the point that my guys will turn from security engineers and security DevOps themselves, I suppose, to more security consultants, and they'll be using their time advising and guiding these DevOps teams rather than actually doing things with these DevOps teams. So again, it's been a challenge, and it's been probably the biggest challenge, and I didn't really mention that, but it's one that it's moving along, and it's getting there, which is fantastic. So hopefully that's answered the question.
Thank you. Let's see. We're gonna have time for a couple more here. I'm gonna wait to see if I get a response back on that one. Ram, question came through that we didn't see any mention of antivirus or similar malware detection. Is there a particular reason for that in the way that it's designed and set up?
Okay. Yeah, I'd say, frankly, the market has moved on from old school sort of methods like antivirus, etc. In general, it's somewhat, I'd say, almost widely accepted at this point that tools like antivirus and others simply aren't applicable in this sorts of environments. They have questionable benefit. They have a very significant drag on system performance. Now, in fact, I want to say Gartner published a report where they actually talked about antivirus just not being something they recommend anymore for being used on in server and workload environments. And if I remember correctly, the reasons for that, and what my own view on this, is that in effect what's been taken the place of this are approaches like what we talked about today, things like workload protection, right, monitoring and tracking and ensuring if you harden your servers, looking for things like vulnerability and configuration assessments, being able to look for file integrity and monitoring that, being able to reduce the network attack surface, as I said earlier, by microsegmentation, and also one of the very significant ways in which people have no longer using antivirus type of tools is by application whitelisting, where they're actually ensuring that the right applications are only those and nothing else are allowed to run on specific workloads. You really tie down how a workload should be configured, what application should run on it, who it should communicate with, etc. And that's far more effective than using signature-based malware detection.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure that everyone who's on sees the polls that are over to on the side of the screen. If you wouldn't mind filling those out, just give us a better understanding of how we're doing and how we can improve and what things we can do to enhance this next time we do this. Let's see if I got one more question on here. We got a couple minutes and we'll finish up. This one will be for Aaron as a customer of both AWS and CloudPassage. I'm going to toss this out to you. What might you use CloudPassage solution for next in your environment?
Okay, that's a good question actually, because there's plenty of ideas. I've got heaps of ideas, and I think I'm painting them all the time with the questions that I have for them. But I guess the big thing for us, to summarize in a nutshell, is containerization. So I talked about things like AWS Lambda before, but our organization and our devs are really big on the idea of containerization. So we're talking about things like, ECS, Docker, etc. So what do we want to use CloudPassage for next? It's the idea of securing our containers. It's really, really important that I start thinking about the next wave of security infrastructure management and solutions, I suppose, because at the moment we have all these EC2 instances sitting in our environment, and those instances are being cycled all the time, and we've got a pretty good handle on that, I must admit. And, I was talking to the team at CloudPassage about this, I think 2 weeks ago at Black Hat, but what we're going to see over the next 12, 18, 24 months, and sooner, is a shift away from EC2 deployment inside this organization to container deployment and container technology becoming more and more prevalent. So what I see we will do with products like CloudPassage is integrate them more into the container security solution, which is something that we're really quite big on, and it's something that we need to get a handle on ourselves, and that's, I think we are. But furthermore, the other thing that we're really quite hot on is also the idea, and I touched on this earlier, is the idea of integrating visibility. It's about taking the information that CloudPassage provides us not only integrating it with our entire security tool set, but also about making the information that CloudPassage gives us not just readable and usable by security professionals, but also readable and usable by the entire organization, so that a developer can understand the why, to understand why they're deploying CloudPassage onto their actual host infrastructure. Those are the two key things that I can see we're going to do what's next.
Thank you. And that's all the time we have. We're right at the top of the hour. Thank everyone for joining us today, and as you registered, we'll have the presentation and all that available for those that have joined, and make sure that if you have questions, please send them an email and we'll make sure we get that to you as soon as possible.